guys, it's Christy from Stone Family Farmstead. Today we're going to learn how to can pinto beans. Now you can use any dry bean that you want for this recipe, and so without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. The first things that you're going to need are 7 quart jars or 14 pint jars. 4 pounds does just about that, maybe a little tiny bit more, so if you've got a nice big canner like I do, then you will be able to double stack. You'll need your lids and your rings that are the right size to fit your canning jars, and you'll need salt, and then you'll need all your canning tools. This video is going to assume that you've canned low acid foods before, so I'm not going to cover all the details. But if you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments. So the first thing I'm going to do is put my beans in the pan. This is after you've sorted and made sure there's nothing icky in the beans or no rocks. I'll fill my pot up with water 2 inches above the top of the beans. You can use any kind of dry beans for this recipe. I'm using pinto today because we eat a whole lot of those in chili and burritos, on tostadas, and just lots of different things. So I like to keep a lot of these on the shelf, and it's just super helpful to have them there. And honestly, I think it's maybe 1/3 or 1/4 of the price of store-bought beans. Okay, so now I have enough water and the beans. I'm going to put this on the fire, and I'm going to bring it to a boil for 2 minutes. Then I'm going to leave it on the stove without the fire on for 1 hour. When your beans are sitting for the hour, fill up your pressure canner to the level of water that it says in the manual for your canner. Each canner is slightly different, and so you need to follow the directions for canning in your canner. The reason why you want to begin heating the water then is because you will want to be able to dip your clean jars into that water before you fill them. So I like to do that during the time that I am allowing the beans to sit, and then that way the jars and the canner and the beans are all going to be ready to go pretty much around the same time. Okay, so I'm going to start putting my jars in. Only about 3 will fit because I'm laying them down. And so basically all I'm going to do is wait a couple of minutes for these jars to warm, and then I'll be adding the beans. These seem warm enough. So I'm going to put my funnel onto the jar, and I'll get some beans, and I want to try to pour out as much of the water as I can. I don't want to put water in this just yet. So I'm just trying to shoot for beans. The reason I do that is because I want to make sure that I have as many beans in the jars as I can at one time. I used to just kind of ladle everything in together, but it created the problem of it created the problem of all the beans floating to the top and there just being way too much broth in there, and I don't really use the broth for anything after the beans are cooked, so it just seemed like not a great idea for my canning experience and for our eating experience, really, because sometimes I'd open them up and there just wouldn't be enough beans for everybody, so that's part of the thing there. Okay, so now I've got all 3 of these filled up, and the next thing I want to do, and you don't have to do this, but you can, is I'm going to add my salt. And I only use Himalayan pink salt. This is going to be tricky to get out of here. A teaspoon per jar. I found that Himalayan pink salt isn't really as salty as table salt is, but I like to use it because the vitamins and the minerals and all that good stuff. So now I'm just going to kind of shake the jars around just a little to let things settle, and then I've got a really good 1-inch headspace and even a little more room for some of the broth. So let me get some of that. Inevitably I get more broth, more beans when I try to capture the broth, but that's okay. It looks like I have plenty of room. I just try not to pour a lot of beans in. Almost full. All right. So the next thing I like to do is to get a butter knife and just run it around the outside of the jars. It helps the salt settle down to the bottom or down through the whole, all the broth through the whole jar. And it also gets those, the pockets of air that are in the middle. It'll get all those bubbles out. I like to fill it enough to where the beans are under the water pretty much, just in case any of the water either leaches out or goes away somehow. I don't have exposed beans at the top when I open the jar. The next thing to do is to wipe down the rims of the jars. The reason for this is because you will get a better seal if you get the food off of the jar. I love that we don't have to heat these anymore. That was just a lot of handling hot things before. Okay, so I'm just going to finger tighten these and set them aside and do my next 2 jars. And once I'm all done filling the jars up, then we're going to put them in the canner. Okay, so the jars are all full now, and it's time to put them in the canner. I'm going to use my jar lifter to put each jar in to the canner, and I don't want them to touch the sides, and I don't want them to touch each other. This is just a precaution to take so that there is no breakage. It's always a bummer to break jars in the canner because it's kind of hard work and tedious work to do this, so you don't want to lose anything. So just adjust them around and try to do your best as far as them not touching each other or the walls of the canner. I mean, just do your best. It doesn't mean if it's touching each other or whatever, it doesn't mean they're necessarily gonna break, but there's always a chance. So you can see now that the canner is full, it fits perfectly. So now that we've got all the jars in the canner, we're going to lock the canner, and if you don't know how to lock your canner, just go to your manual and see what it says, because every one of them is different. And I'm going to turn my stove up to high, and I'm going to wait until the exhaust vent is venting out steam. And once it does that, I'm going to time it for 10 minutes. Allow it to vent for 10 minutes before adding your pressure regulator to the top. Once you put your pressure regulator on, you're going to watch your gauge for it to reach 11 pounds. If you're confident that your dial gauge is calibrated properly, you can go simply by that. If you're not sure and you haven't had your extension office calibrate your dial gauge, you can use a weighted pressure regulator. The weighted pressure regulator has 3 parts. If you have the whole thing put together, this is a 15-pound weight. This is what I use. I am 1,000 feet altitude, and so I haven't had my dial gauge calibrated. We don't have that service at our local extension office, so I just can these at 15 pounds pressure, and I just use this pressure regulator. If I wanted to can something at 10 pounds, I would take the top off, and then if I wanted to can something at 5 pounds, that would be removing this small part from here, but mine happens to be fused together. Once your dial gauge or your pressure regulator indicates that you're at the right pounds of pressure, that's when you turn on your timer for 75 minutes for pint jars or 90 minutes for quart jars. Once your jars are finished processing, leave them in the canner until the canner decompresses. Once your canner is completely decompressed and all of the little plugs and things are down and the dial gauge says 0, you can now remove the pressure regulator. No noise should come out of it. And then you can open it, opening it away from your face so the steam doesn't burn your face or your hands. Remove the jars from the canner and set them on a towel on the counter and allow them to sit for 24 hours. During this time, it's going to complete the seal on the jar. After 24 hours, take the rings off of the jars and check the seals. Don't forget to label them with the month and year that you canned your beans. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have any questions by leaving me a comment. If you prefer a more detailed explanation of this, remember you can head over to my blog and find the Canning Pinto Beans post. And if I didn't answer questions in the video, you'll probably get your questions answered by reading that post. If not, please leave me a comment and I will get the answer for you. Thanks a lot for watching.